I've been meaning to talk some Jurassic Park on this channel for a minute now. It's a franchise that I think is right in line with some of the other familiar faces here. The only problem is that I wasn't really sure how to go about doing it. What angle could I tackle this series from that everyone else hasn't already? Well, not to say nobody has talked about what this video is going to be about, but I think it still offers some interesting material to dig up. The first Jurassic Park movie needs little introduction. Widely praised upon release for its innovations in visual effects, sound design, and dinosaur accuracy, this initial 1993 outing remains a firm favorite among many today, not just for those aspects, but also its excellent cast portraying memorable characters, skillful direction by Steven Spielberg, tight and well-paced narrative, and its balancing of intelligent, thought-provoking science fiction with the thrilling, high-octane action sequences. It is, in no uncertain terms, a classic. But being the big-budget studio movie it is, not to mention it being based on a pre-existing source, a lot of cut content and scrapped ideas exist for the film as well. Whether it be adaptations of parts from the book, originally written scenes that didn't survive subsequent drafts, or moments that were actually shot but never made it into the final film, these are the deleted scenes from the first Jurassic Park. Let's start with something most of you are probably familiar with. The fabled river raft scene is an iconic segment from Michael Crichton's original JP novel. The striking image of a Tyrannosaurus pursuing Grant and the kids through the water as they desperately paddle for safety is one that has been retooled several times in other Jurassic media, from The Ride to Jurassic Park 3 to even the Sega Genesis game. However, despite it being one of the most famous parts of the franchise, it never made its way into the actual first movie. It was considered, however, and even had concept art drawn up for it, but one of the film's screenwriters, David Koepp, elected to delete it from his draft, which is the one that bears closest resemblance to the final movie. Paraphrasing Koepp's own words, he didn't want the raft scene because he found it to be redundant and arbitrary. Not to mention, it would have cost a lot. Like a lot. I could somewhat understand where he was coming from. After all, while most people know about the Tyrannosaur chase from the novel, that was but one part of a much larger section that involved Grant and the kids encountering all kinds of other dinosaurs, and I can see how all that would have messed with the pacing and artificially inflated the runtime for sure. As for the expenses...
Spared no expense.
I don't know about all that, since that would have been dependent on how much of the raft stuff they wanted to include. What I do know is that the T-Rex animatronic had a bit of trouble with water, as you can see in this behind the scenes footage. That was just from being soaked in rain, and it already made the Rex look like it was having a seizure, so you can imagine what submerging the entire thing would have done to its internal mechanisms. They either would have had to redesign it or go full CGI, which, considering how expensive and time-consuming that would have been in 1993, yeah, it's starting to add up why this didn't get included. Oh well, we'll always have the novel and the Spinosaurus scene from the third one. That ought to tide people over. John Hammond was not originally set to survive his adventures in Jurassic Park. This is another aspect that initially appeared in the book. There, he was eaten alive by Procompsognathus in a manner very similar to the hunter Dieter Stark's death in The Lost World. You're gonna notice that a lot of scenes and ideas that originally appeared in the novel that didn't make their way into the film adaptation would be retooled for future sequels. Anyway, Hammond was way more of an ass in the novel as compared to the movies, so you could argue he got what was coming, but I don't know, being viciously ripped apart by what are essentially reptilian vermin is pretty rough, no matter what the person may have done to warrant it. While this specific sequence wasn't planned for Hammond in any of the earlier drafts, multiple scripts from multiple writers did plan for InGen's founder to go in some interesting ways all their own. Now is a good time to go over the general layout of how Jurassic Park was scripted. The credits for the film list Michael Crichton and David Koepp as the screenwriters, and while both did contribute to the writing of the film, this single credit makes it seem like they wrote the final draft together, which is not what happened. More accurately, this is how it went down. Crichton wrote the first draft in early 1991, very shortly after the release of his novel. Later that same year, another writer, Malleus Scotch Marmo, hot off co-writing Spielberg's previous film Hook, wrote another draft based off Crichton's original screenplay. Then, David Koepp came aboard in 1992 and wrote another draft that would, with some minor tweaking, eventually morph into the final version of the script. So, rather than just stating that the film's screenplay is an adaptation of Michael Crichton's novel by David Koepp and Crichton himself, it'd be more accurate to say that the script is Koepp's adaptation of Malleus Scotch Marmo's adaptation of Crichton's adaptation of his own book.
Everybody got that?
All that was a very long-winded way of saying that both the Crichton and Scotch Marmo drafts include very different fates for Hammond as compared to the film where he, well, doesn't die. Let's go over them. The Crichton draft has a surprisingly noble death for the billionaire, in which he saves his grandchildren by distracting a pursuing pack of velociraptors with a video that was supposed to be featured on the tour. As the carnivores descend upon him, the recorded voices of him and Ed Regis, yes, Regis was in the first draft, can be heard saying, "Welcome to Jurassic Park." The Scotch Marmo script, on the other hand, has Hammond suffer a far more ambiguous and symbolic fate. This death includes the tumble down the hill that began his demise in the book, but instead of the compies picking him off, he simply lands face first in a puddle and drowns. But it doesn't end there. Right at the end, a mosquito lands on his hand and sucks his blood, just like they did to the dinosaurs. I think both of these scenes would have been pretty decent ways for Hammond to go out, and given how even these earlier versions toned down his douchiness from the book substantially, it'd be interesting to see how audiences would have reacted to them. But I'm also pretty happy with the ending for Hammond we got in the movies, and I think most people feel the same way. Right, now onto the scenes that survived the drafting stages. Originally, the dig site scene early on in the movie was supposed to go on a little longer and more strongly establish the romantic relationship between Alan and Ellie. There was also going to be an additional bit that further emphasized Grant's dislike of children, as well as more information related to the Velociraptor. These portions were probably removed since the final edit already does a fine job at establishing all of these things without the extra bits, and so they might have come off as a little redundant. Plus, it shortens the movie, and that's always nice. A pretty common reaction I tend to have to deleted scenes in general is, yeah, that's cool, but I can see why it was cut. Like, yeah, it's kinda neat to know there's a deleted scene where Grant and Sattler kiss on screen, but if the movie spells out the relationship well enough already, would it have really been a worthwhile inclusion? I don't know, but if you want a really worthwhile inclusion, see me at the next one. Okay, there's an obvious question here. Why the hell am I talking about a few second shot of a leaf being grabbed when I already stated I would be selective about the deleted scenes I was going to talk about? Well, I think it's interesting as this shot kind of mystified me for years since it was actually in the trailer. Yeah, in the official movie trailer for Jurassic Park, we get a short scene of Ellie grabbing the leaf, which we're to assume is the one that she's gawking at later when they first see the Brachiosaurus. Now, for years, I would see that trailer here and there and wonder, was that in the movie? Did I somehow miss that every time I saw it? The short answer is, no, I didn't. It was removed from the film, but left in the trailer. Obviously, there's not much more to this one, but that interesting Mandela effect garnered it a part in this video. One thing that maybe would have helped the movie more than hurt it was an intended resolution to the sick Triceratops subplot. Sure, you could argue it would have crowded the film, but personally, I think the explanation they gave is pretty ingenious, as well as being somewhat educational, I suppose. Now, what would that explanation have been? Well, remember how Ellie couldn't find any lilac berries in the trike's shit? That's because the Triceratops wasn't actually digesting the berries, but rather swallowing them, then using them as gizzard stones to help digest her food. This is an actual behavior exhibited in the fossil record. Animals swallowing stones and other objects to grind up their food instead of chewing it. They're called gastroliths. It would have been cool to see this included, as it not only would have provided a resolution to this part of the movie, but also may have been some audience's first exposure to this interesting bit of paleoanatomy. Another deleted Triceratops scene involved Lex being pestered by, and according to some sources, later riding a baby Triceratops, the animatronic of which was constructed by Stan Winston Studios for screen use, but ended up not making the final cut, and in this case, I can see why. Just based on the description of how the scene would have gone, it all sounds way too goofy, and with it having to occur during the other Triceratops scenes, so right before the power goes out, it would have likely come across as tonal whiplash. Now, stop me if you've heard this one yet, but in the book, there actually was a baby Triceratops that Lex befriended and even named Ralph. She also found and named a baby velociraptor Clarence, who had the ability to change colors like a cuttlefish. Reading the book versus watching the movie of Jurassic Park is kind of like the difference between just finishing a game's story and 100%ing it. Sure, you could stop at 1, but why deprive yourself of all this extra content? Anyway, not all was lost for the film version of Ralph, as the animatronic originally made for the first movie did end up, again, stop me if you've heard this, appearing in the second one. Alright, enough of this cutesy shit, let's get into some serious business. Okay, this is a big one. Alternate endings. I can safely assume at least a slim majority of you watching have heard before that the Raptors vs. T-Rex fight was not how the film was originally supposed to conclude. How was it? Well, that's kind of a loaded question, and strap in, because I'm going to go through these pretty quick. Probably the most notorious one of these alternate finales is the one that they actually came very close to using until they switched it out at the last minute. It would have involved the humans escaping and dispatching the raptors on their own, without any dinosaurian assistance. We know at least one of the raptors would have been crushed by the jawbone of the fossilized T-Rex. As for the other one, there's conflicting reports. I've heard Grant was supposed to skewer it with another one of the dinosaur bones. John Hammond may have been set to just shoot the other raptor at one point. One, the other, or both may have been considered, but it doesn't really matter since we all know what ended up happening to this scrapped final showdown. But here are some other alternates you might not be aware of. The aforementioned Crichton draft featured a somewhat grim ending like the book. No firebombing Isla Nublar, but rather a somber realization that the Lysine contingency is taking effect, and that the dinosaurs will all soon die. Not entirely sure how that's possible. I thought the point of the Lysine contingency is that it was a terrible idea that didn't work. Regardless, this ending bears a resemblance to the ending of the Lost World book, where the dinosaurs were, once again, doomed to extinction because of a viral disease spreading throughout Isla Sorna. I wonder if this is where Crichton originally came up with that idea. The Malia Scotch Marmo script also has a pretty bleak ending, but I basically already described it when I was talking about Hammond's alternate deaths. Yeah, Hammond's drowning was pretty much the ending of that draft. There's like one more paragraph afterwards, and that's it. Yet another ending that resurfaced fairly recently is one that made it to storyboard and features the T-Rex pursuing the survivors onto the helipad and lunging at Dr. Grant as he's climbing into the helicopter. This would have been the most openly antagonistic the T-Rex was portrayed as being the entire story, which is a far cry from the actual film, where the opposite is true of its final scene. A lot of that has to do with the musical choice to play John Williams' main Jurassic Park theme over the T-Rex's appearance. However, for a rare musical alteration, this wasn't the filmmaker's original idea either. You might notice, if you grab your Jurassic Park soundtracks and follow along with me, that the track T-Rex Rescue and Finale doesn't include this triumphant part of the score where you'd expect it to be. Instead, it's replaced, or rather reinstated from the original, with a more intense cue featuring the motif commonly associated with the Raptors. You know, the though in this first film it's more of just a general danger music. A video actually exists on YouTube showcasing this original track laid over the actual movie, and it's an interesting insight into how music can so dramatically change the intended tone of a scene. As great as this ending is just the way it is, I have to admit, I am slightly partial to the original intended music for it. If for no other reason than it would just quell the idea that the T-Rex was actually intentionally saving the people, and it keeps the intensity going right up until the last minute. Now, since we're talking about this scene, I think before we finish up here, we should go over one last deleted bit, kinda, but not really. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so there's a bit of an urban legend that in the original theatrical version of the Raptors vs. Rex fight, right before the T-Rex comes in and attacks the Raptor, there was an insert shot of the T-Rex busting through the wall of the visitor center. There was not. Don't believe me? Okay, well then maybe you'll believe Steve Williams, one of the CG animators on the film, who stated that no such scene ever existed. But personal insight into the production aside, how do we know he's telling the truth? I mean, I guess we don't, but it seems like a really silly thing to lie about. Why would this shot even exist in the movie anyway? The raptor stalking to the T-Rex biting down on it is one unbroken shot. No way they could just tape two disparate shots together after removing one that was supposed to go in between them. It wouldn't look right. It's very likely just a rumor, and the people claiming they remember seeing otherwise are getting Mandela affected. I feel like such a killjoy right now. Must I ruin everything? Anyway, that pretty much brings us to the end of all the Jurassic Park deleted scenes that I thought were worth bringing up. Because yes, of course, there are a crap ton of other things that I didn't mention in this video, and maybe I will in the future. For now though, I've got an entire rest of a series worth of deleted scenes to go over, assuming that's what all of you want to see. I'm really sorry I've been away for so long. I've missed making videos and have been trying to get back into it, but I think taking some time to devote myself to other projects, as well as sorting out some personal matters and just taking it easy for the most part, has been for the best. I can now come back to this channel fresh and re-energized and ready to keep entertaining all of you with new content on the way, so I appreciate your patience as I've been doing that. Check back in next time as we go over the deleted scenes of the Lost World Jurassic Park. Until then, thank you for watching, have a great day, and see ya.